One of the other most useful things that you can play with in Photoshop in terms of having two images interact with each other is playing with blending mode and transparency. So, one of the things I had you guys think about as a way to make your image more interesting is maybe to add a texture. Or we talked about perhaps you wanted to turn Rex's body into a microphone. So, how are you going to add that texture on top of the body? One of the things you can do is to take two layers and change how they interact with each other. So you can do this through either bringing the transparency up or down or playing with blending modes. So I've got two images here, and you have both of these in your demo, and you can also play with the other ones that are listed at the end of the slide. So I've got this texture, and I've got this is salt flats in Chile. This is some kind of barbed plant thing. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select all. I'm going to copy my kind of texture and I'm going to paste it on top of my image of the salt flats here. So you can see over in your layers, I've got one layer on top of the other. Now in my layers, I can, at the top here, I can change the opacity. So I can make that 50% and I can kind of see the sky and the outline of the mountains and the salt flats, but that's not quite what I'm looking for. I want it to look a little bit more like it's kind of burnt into it. So instead of changing the opacity, I can change the blending mode. So that's where it says normal. That's what I'm going to play with. Now the nice thing about the latest version of Photoshop is that as you scroll over the name, it actually previews for you what it's going to look like. And so you can go through these and see how the top half is interacting with the bottom half. Well, that's interesting because you can see with darker color where the sky is, where it's super light, you see the texture of our plant kind of full up, but where it's interacting with the darker areas of the image, you've got this kind of like almost like burnt out thing. Lighten does almost the opposite of that. But it's kind of interesting what it does down the bottom here. And again, if I say light that, I can then play with kind of both playing with my opacity and my blending mode. That's not quite what I'm looking for. Screen's interesting too. Again, it's much more intense down in the bottom where there's the dark part of my image than it is the top, but I'm not completely losing the texture from the top. Color dodge burns it out. Lighter colors, also kind of interesting. It's very similar to lighten, but you can see slight differences. Overlay, again, is kind of like screen, but it's a little bit more intense. Kind of like soft light. So far, that's the one that's closest to what I was going for. Whee! The other thing that's interesting down the bottom is you can do hue, saturation, and color. Color can sometimes come in handy, not in this case, but if you're wanting to colorize an image, you want to make something look kind of sepia, or you want to give it all a specific cast, as if you like put a watercolor on top of it, you can actually use your, say, your paint bucket tool, make a new layer, drop a color into that, and then if you color the image, it will make it all that color. So soft light, I think, was the closest to what I was looking for. Now, again, maybe I want to drop it down a little bit. So I like how it looks down here, but it's not quite what I'm going for. So here's where you might be able to bring together some of the different things that we looked at. So maybe I want to make this, I want to bump that contrast up. I need to make sure I'm in my layer. I want to play with these levels. I'm going to bring that black in. Maybe I need to bring the white up so it really pops out. So again, you might need to kind of combine some of the elements we talked about in order to make things look the way that you want it to. Okay, so that's getting a little bit closer. So now when I drop the opacity down, I'm still getting the kind of brightness of the bright lights in here. And what I said about maybe using the color, so maybe I really like this kind of red that's popping up in the, this kind of red to orange that's popping up. So I'm gonna hide my layer here for a second, and I wanna select with my eyedropper. I want this kind of red, slightly darker red. And I like the orange, so I'm now gonna I'm gonna switch this so that my foreground is now the white because I want this kind of orangey. And so I got those two colors. I'm gonna show my texture again. I wanna make a new layer, and I'm gonna have this be gradient. And I wanna make this new layer. I'm gonna go back to my paint bucket tool, hold it down so I can get the gradient tool. And I want, you can see here, I want this to be a gradient from the red to the yellow. So kind of along where this guy goes in real life. It kind of goes from there to there. So you see it's made this the gradient. And that's a little bit too harsh. I want it to be a little subtler. So maybe I'm going to go from the bottom of the mountain up to where, I guess here. Okay, I like that a little bit better. Now, this gradient is now over everything. And again, I can use the opacity, but I'm not getting the effect I want. Remember I said that one of the modes is color? So let's go down all the way to the bottom here. So hue, interesting. Saturation's weird, but color. All right, I like that. So now that's basically coloring in over my image. That's a little bit stronger. I want some of the original color to come through. So again, I can pull on the gradient, I can pull on the opacity here. I maybe only want to do this a little bit. I want this to be a subtle thing. 25%. Again, if I hide it, that's what it looks like originally. I'm getting those blues and yellows coming through. But this is kind of bringing it all together. And now maybe I actually want a little bit more because it's making everything seem very unified, so I can bring up the texture a little bit more. And yeah, I can... No, I still like my soft light. Undo. There we go. So there is kind of an interesting image that I've made from all of these various pieces. So you can go ahead and play either with these images, again they're in the demo folder, or the other images that I showed you at the end of the slides that are available to you as well. And again, you can play with that to make some interesting things, and hopefully this gives you some ideas about ways in which you can bring images together in your poster in a way that's interesting.